Imagine you were a barmaid in 18th century London. Your day didn't start with an alarm. It started when the chill of dawn crept into your bones because you slept on a lumpy mattress behind the tavern kitchen, beneath thin damp blankets that reeked of beer and sweat. You worked where you slept, and you never really left the noise or the stench. Before sunrise, your hands were already raw from hauling water, scrubbing floors sticky with last night's ale, and wiping down greasy tankards. The tavern smelled of sour spirits and unwashed bodies, and it never truly aired out. Your hair always smelled like it, no matter how hard you tried to wash it clean. Customers would start arriving as early as 7 a.m., not for breakfast, but for gin. Cheap, poisonous gin that burned their throats and made them mean. You had to pour it with a smile, even when their hands wandered, their breath stank, and their insults cut deep. Being pretty meant better tips. Being too pretty meant trouble. And the boss, usually a man with a temper as short as his morals. If you spilled a drink or talked back, you'd be slapped, fired, or worse. You were expected to flirt but never say no. Smile but never show fear. You were always walking a tightrope. One wrong look, one poorly timed joke, and a drunk might smash a bottle against the wall or your face. And the law, it didn't protect barmaids. You were just another poor woman in a dirty tavern. You were expendable. You worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week on your feet, in a corset, in shoes that blistered your heels. No holidays, no protection, no future, and no one called you by your name. Just girl, you don't remember the last time you felt safe at work. Because in 18th century London, gin wasn't just a drink, it was a plague. It was cheaper than beer, easier to get than bread, and twice as deadly. They called it mother's ruin, but it ruined everyone, especially you. Every shift, you poured glass after glass of rot-gut gin for men who could barely stand. Some came in silent and left screaming. Others came in angry and left in a fight. You were always in the crossfire. A slurred demand, a rough hand grabbing your waist, and you'd have to twist away without spilling a drop. You were expected to laugh it off. If you didn't, you risked getting punched, spat on, or dragged into the back alley. Sometimes, girls didn't come back from those alleys, and no one asked questions. The tavern owner didn't care as long as the drunks kept paying. The constable, he might have been one of those drunks. And your fellow barmaids, they were too tired or too terrified to speak up. You were all just girls with ruined hands and empty pockets trying to survive one more night. Your blouse was always damp-soaked in spilled gin, vomit, or worse. You couldn't afford a second shift. So you wore it again and again until the threads broke and the fabric clung to your skin like a second punishment. And the smell, the sour mix of sweat, spirits, and soot never left. You scrubbed your hands until they bled, but you still carried the stink of desperation. Even sleep wasn't safe. You curled up behind the ale barrels, listening to the groans and fights through the paper-thin walls. Rats scurried by your toes. Sometimes, you heard sobbing from the next room. You never asked who it was. You knew. Imagine this. A man twice your size grabs your wrist, so hard you think your bone might crack. You're only 17. You flinch. You look toward your boss, but he turns away. He always turns away. You've learned to smile through it, to pour another gin, to let the man think he's funny when he's cruel. Because if you speak up, if you say no, you lose your job. And in London, in 1742, no job means no food, no roof, no safety. So, you learn to survive quietly. You walk home barefoot most nights because shoes wear out and wages don't cover replacements. The cobbled alleys are slick with rot and waste, and the rats are bold. They race between your feet. You barely notice anymore. Your room is the size of a cupboard, shared with another girl who works at the brothel down the lane. Sometimes she comes home crying. Other times she comes home with blood on her shift. You say nothing. She does the same for you. Because in this city, in this century, misery is just another part of womanhood. Especially when you serve men for a living. You once dreamed of learning to read, of saving enough to buy a dress that wasn't patched together like a corpse. Now you dream of getting through one shift without being groped. Of one meal that doesn't come from someone's leftover crust. You heard once that the rich drank wine in crystal glasses and listened to Mozart while reclining on velvet cushions. But here, in the gin-soaked belly of London, your symphony is broken glass and belching men. And velvet, the only thing that touches your skin, is cold sweat and wood splinters from the bar counter. Imagine the stench of sour beer soaked into your skin, so deep it clings even after you scrub. The tavern's dark, the candles flicker in smoky sconces. A man vomits near your foot, and the barkeep just kicks sawdust over it. You're told to smile. You always have to smile. But this isn't ale they're guzzling. This is gin, cheap, raw, and brutal. London's poison. They call it mother's ruin. You know why? It's not just the patrons who drink. You do too, just to numb the shaking in your hands. The floor is never still. The yelling never stops. Your ears ring even when you sleep. You're told it's your job to keep the men happy. That's part of being a barmaid. Not written in the job post, but everyone knows it. If he wants his drink with a wink and a soft touch, you give it. If he slaps your rear and laughs, you laugh too. Because if you complain, there's 100 other desperate girls waiting to take your place. Some of the older barmaids warn you, don't let the gin take you. But it's already started. Your hands tremble when you thread your laces. Your teeth feel loose. Your belly aches for food. But you spend your penny wages on rot-gut gin to sleep through the night. You're 17 and feel 70. And God help you if you fall pregnant. Some barmaids do, many do. No protection. No sympathy. The tavern owners don't keep pregnant girls. It's bad for business. You'll be out on the street, belly swelling, nowhere to go. You've seen it happen. You once watched Malia, girl, your age, drag herself into the alley behind the tavern, blood on her skirts. She whispered that she used Penit Royal. You never saw her again. Imagine walking home from the tavern just before sunrise. Your apron stained, your breath thick with gin fumes, not even yours. You're exhausted, hollow. But the stares you get, those cold, sneering stares, cut deeper than the winter air. To them, you're not a worker. You're not a girl trying to survive. You're a barmaid, which, in 18th century London, may as well be a synonym for prostitute. People spit near your shoes. They whisper as you pass. Church women clutch their bags tighter. Some men smirk and ask what time your shift really ends. You've done nothing but pour ale and dodge wandering hands. But the world doesn't care. Respectability is a luxury you can't afford. The truth is, many barmaids are forced to trade more than drinks. When wages are low, sometimes just a few shillings a weekend, you have no family, no husband, no safety net. Sometimes, survival means crossing a line you swore you never would. And once you're seen as damaged, you're marked for life. There's no returning to a decent house, no marrying a tradesman, no future as a respectable wife. In some taverns, the lines between alehouse and brothel blur completely. The landlords know. They take a cut. And if you say no to a favorite customer, you might find yourself let go by week's end. And yet, barmaids were everywhere, overworked, underpaid, and unprotected. Your body isn't your own. Not in the way men leer at it. Not in the way the church judges it. Not in the way poverty sells it. Imagine this. One night a man grabs you from behind while you're hauling tankards. You shout. You struggle. But he's a regular, wealthy, well-known. The tavern keeper laughs it off. Says he's just had too much. And tells you to calm down. You consider going to the law. But here's the truth. The law doesn't care. In 18th century London, courts like the Old Bailey were packed with testimonies of women like you, barmaids, servants, prostitutes, accused, not protected. If something happened to you, you'd need male witnesses, spotless morals, and powerful allies to even stand a chance in court. Most barmaids had none of those. And if you dared to speak up, you'd be dismissed, your character torn to shreds. They'd say you led him on, that you were asking for it, that barmaids are known for being loose. In one Old Bailey case from 1765, a barmaid testified against a grocer who attacked her while she worked. Despite bruises and 2 witnesses, the jury acquitted him because she was the kind of woman who would enjoy the attention. Another barmaid, Alice Clifton, was assaulted outside her inn in 1789. When she pressed charges, her landlord fired her for bringing shame to the tavern. She ended up begging on Fleet Street. Injustice wasn't the exception, it was the norm. You had no rights, no protection, no voice. And yet, you had to keep smiling. You had to go back behind that bar, pour ale with trembling hands, and pretend like nothing had happened, because survival depended on it. Imagine this. You think you're being hired to pour drinks, clean tables, maybe serve food. But very quickly, you realize you're not just a server, you're the attraction. In 18th century London, tavern owners weren't just selling alcohol, they were selling you. A pretty face behind the counter meant more men staying longer, drinking more, and spending their hard-earned wages. Some landlords even advertised their barmaids like prizes. One popular tavern in Covent Garden was known more for its rosy-cheeked wenches than the quality of its ale. Your job became a performance. Smile wider, flirt harder, ignore the leering, the pinching, the crude jokes. The more charming and compliant you were, the more money your boss made, and if you didn't play along, there was always another desperate girl waiting outside the door. And tips. You might expect at least a few coins for your troubles. But often, your landlord took a cut of those too, or pocketed all of it, claiming it was part of the house's earnings. So you'd work 14 hours a day, entertain drunks, fend off gropes, and still go home with barely enough for bread. And when you were no longer young or pretty enough, you were replaced. No pension, no farewell, just a thank you and the cold slam of a door behind you. Barmaids weren't just overworked, they were expendable. And still, every morning, you'd lace up your bodice, brace your aching back, and step behind the bar again. Because what else was there? Imagine the shift ending at 1 a.m. You've been on your feet since mid-morning, drenched in sweat, beer, and the breath of 100 drunk men. You haven't eaten since sunrise. Your feet burn, your back feels broken. But worse, you've barely made enough to survive. Now picture this. A man leans in after last call. He's older, well-dressed, his voice thick with gin. He says he'll give you a shilling to come upstairs, or maybe two. Enough for meat and bread for several days. You hesitate. Not because it's the first time someone asked, but because you've said yes before. In 18th century London, the line between barmaid and sex worker was thin, blurry, and often forced. Many taverns doubled as brothels. If your boss wanted to offer additional services, you didn't get to say no. Not without risking your job or your safety. Some women chose it. Many didn't. There were even flash houses, taverns infamous for their mix of booze, gambling, and women. Barmaids in these places were often trapped in cycles of coercion, debt, and dependency, forced to entertain men far beyond the bar counter. And still, society judged you. The same men who grabbed you by the waist and whispered filth would call you a whore in public. The same city that built its nightlife on your labor would call you immoral and disgraceful. No protection, no dignity, and certainly, no justice. If you were lucky, you avoided disease or pregnancy. If you weren't, you ended up in the workhouse or dead before 30. And yet, every day, new girls arrived from the countryside, thinking they'd found honest work in the big city. But behind every cheerful alehouse sign was another story like yours. One where survival meant sacrifice. Where your body was currency. And where being a barmaid meant being everything but never being safe. Imagine it's just past midnight, and a city constable barges through the tavern door with 2 watchmen. You freeze, tankard in hand. They aren't here for the drunken men throwing dice, or the wealthy gentlemen making side deals. No, they're here for you. Disorderly conduct, they say. Or encouraging vice. Or simply, being found in a place of ill repute. In 1733, a young barmaid named Mary Foy was dragged before the magistrate at Bow Street. Her crime, laughing too loudly with male patrons. The judge called her behavior inappropriate for a young woman of service, and had her publicly whipped. She wasn't alone. In 1751, Margaret Rudd, another London barmaid, was arrested during a tavern raid in Covent Garden. Though she wasn't a prostitute, She was accused of being one because she served drinks to men too late at night and was found in a compromised position, meaning sitting on a customer's lap. She pleaded her case, said she was just tired, said she needed the job. They didn't listen. She was jailed for 14 days, then dismissed from the tavern. Destitute, she later returned to prostitution just to eat. And then there's the case of Unveils, a black barmaid from Westminster, mentioned in 18th century criminal records. She was frequently arrested for brawling with customers. What those records didn't say was that many of those fights were in self-defense. One drunken man tried to grope her. Another beat her with a stool. She fought back. The men walked free. Anne was sent to the stocks, a public punishment meant to humiliate. Crowds threw rotten food. Children mocked her. Her only crime, not taking abuse quietly. These women weren't rare cases. They were typical. Barmaids walked a razor's edge every day. Smile too much, you're a flirt. Smile too little, you're rude. Talk back, you're defiant. Stay silent, you're suspicious. There was no way to win. Their lives weren't just difficult, they were deliberately set up to punish the poor, the female, the defenseless. Imagine now you're 38. Your hands ache. Your back gives out if you bend too quickly. And worst of all, you're no longer young. In a tavern world obsessed with youth, charm, and rosy cheeks, your value fades with every wrinkle. It didn't matter how hard you worked, how many nights you stayed on your feet, or how many drunks you dragged out by the collar. The moment your looks faded, you were treated like spoiled milk. Some tavern owners let you go gently. We're cutting staff, they'd say. Others were cruel. You're too old for this place. One barmaid recalled hearing in a court record from 1772, the lads want a fresh face. But where could you go? There were no pensions, no retirement homes for women who'd spent their lives hauling beer and fending off hands. Most barmaids ended up in workhouses, cold, overcrowded, disease-ridden prisons for the poor. Others ended up on the street, begging or prostituting themselves in alleys they once walked in pride. Some drank themselves to death, curling up in corners of the taverns they used to serve in. And just a few married, one of the old regulars, a widowed carpenter, a blind pensioner, someone who could give them shelter, not love. But that, too, often came with a cost. You became his cook, his cleaner, and sometimes his punching bag. One anonymous former barmaid left a note behind when she died in 1791. I was never seen, only used. My beauty paid their bills. My silence paid my rent. Now I am neither beautiful nor silent, and so I am nothing. That's what happened when the beer foam dried, and the candlelight no longer hid your age. You weren't just forgotten. You were erased. Imagine you were her, a girl with calloused hands and forced charm, standing in the stink of stale beer, soaked hems, and burnt meat. Each night, you wore a smile that wasn't yours. Each morning, you woke up a little more hollow. No statues were built for barmaids. No portraits hung in grand houses. No poets wrote sonnets for the women who wiped vomit off oak tables and bled in silence when the men pinched too hard. But they existed, thousands of them. They laughed when they were dying inside. They served drinks while starving. They ducked fists, kept secrets, aged alone. And still, history looked away. She was not a queen. She was not a lady of court. She was not even considered decent. But she was real. She was resilient, and she was everywhere. So tonight, when the lights dim and your glass is full, remember her. Not for her beauty, not for her service, but for her survival in a world that never once made space for her. Because behind every tankard, raised in cheer, there was once a barmaid who never got to raise her own.